Good morning. Good morning.
Morning.
There we go. Thank you. Welcome, everyone, to the Wilson Center. My name is Eddie Acevedo, and I am the Chief of Staff here at the center. It's very great to have all of you. Congress established the Wilson Center some 5 decades ago for the purpose, in their words, of, quote, strengthening the fruitful relation between the world of learning and the world of public affairs. What that means is that we are congressionally chartered, scholarship-driven, and fiercely nonpartisan. As we prepare to celebrate Hispanic Heritage Month, today's theme of looking towards the Americas as an untapped economic potential is extremely timely. In 2019, U.S. foreign direct investment in the region was $1.3 trillion, and U.S. trade with the hemisphere totaled $1.9 trillion. In the area of critical minerals, the region produces vital quantities of lithium, copper, and nickel. When it comes to food security, the agriculture sector accounts for a substantial portion of GDP for many of the countries in the region. In addition, the hemisphere is also an important oil exporter. 3 of the top 5 sources of U.S. total petroleum imports are from Canada, Mexico, and Colombia. Investments and promoting trade throughout the Americas can also help elevate the economic prosperity of the U.S. and our region. The U.S. has FTAs with 20 countries. More than half of them are right here in the hemisphere. USMCA with Canada and Mexico, Central America, the Dominican Republic, Chile, Peru, and Colombia. At the same time, we have countries such as Ecuador and Uruguay who have expressed a desire to enter into an FTA with the U.S., and we have countries like Costa Rica who have expressed interest in joining USMCA. By adding an accession clause to USMCA, just like we had in NAFTA, will give an opportunity for non-signatory countries to join the agreement. This opt-in mechanism would be an incentive for other countries to receive access to the North America market and adhere to higher trade standards. We must also step up our actions in promoting nearshoring closer to our borders. Bringing manufacturing to the Americas will help foster economic growth and will mitigate the risk of any supply chain impediments. But we must also work with the private sector in the region to better learn how we can help and what are some of the impediments that we must overcome. And that brings us to today's important discussion. On our panel, we have a great leader, philanthropist, and entrepreneur from the region, Mr. Wood Stanton. Mr. Stanton was born in Medellin, Colombia, and is executive chairman of Arcos Dorados, the world's largest McDonald's franchisee. Arcos Dorados employs more than 95,000 people across 20 countries in Latin America and the Caribbean, operating more than 2,000 restaurants and with revenues of more than $4 billion US. He also serves as chair of the Latin America Program Advisory Board here at the Wilson Center. Thank you, sir, for being here with us. And leading the conversation today, we have a very special guest, President Ivan Duque Marquez, who served as president of Colombia from 2018 to 2022. He is the chair and distinguished fellow here at the Wilson Center, leading our work in what we call the Hemisphere of Prosperity and Freedom. This initiative aims to remind policymakers of the crucial importance of fostering economic growth by harnessing private enterprise in the Western Hemisphere and shines a spotlight on tyrannies in the region who continue to commit human rights abuses and atrocities. We believe that the Western Hemisphere can lead the international community in supporting democratic values, mitigating climate extremes, responding to human displacement, and strengthening economic prosperity. With that in mind, it is my honor to introduce our panel, and I will hand it over to you, Mr. President. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Eddie. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's a great pleasure to have a great friend, and I could say a compatriot, Wood Stanton, who has been one of the most recognized businessman, philanthropist, and entrepreneur in Latin America, who has been also engaged with the Woodrow Wilson Center for a long time. I also want to express my welcome to Ambassador Negroponte. Ben, Cindy, it's great to see you here. And all of you are going to enjoy this conversation with an amazing human being. I have to say, Woods, just to put additional information in this conversation, going beyond what Eddie just mentioned. You were born in Medellin, but you've also lived a great part of your life in Argentina. But you have been a true Latino Americanist because you have done business in most of the region. You were trained in Emory as an undergrad, and then you went for Switzerland to have your MBA. And you have a great family entrepreneurial background from your grandfather, your father, and you have been able to see beyond the evident to identify business opportunities. So this conversation it's about Latin America, freedom and prosperity, from your perspective, from the private sector, from your own life experience. And I want to begin with that question. I want you to tell us a little bit about your story, about how you took decisions that were bold enough, and now you generate almost 100,000 jobs, but you're also working very hard in technology in order to improve the food supply. And as you mentioned to me in our conversation, sustainability is also part of your vision, your principles, and the way that you want to develop further business. So why don't we begin with that, and you tell us a little bit how you inherited values and principles from your father, your grandfather, and how you have made Arcos Dorados what it is today, which is not only a big franchise established in Latin America, but one of the great mobilizers of formal jobs in the region. So thank you so much for being here, Woods.
No, thank you, Mr. President. It's a true pleasure to be here with all of you. Ambassador Negroponte, it's great to see you again. And no, my name is Wood Staten. It's not a Colombian name. It's not an Argentine name. And it's actually, my father's name was Wood Staten, and he was the son of a guy who had been a sharecropper in Alabama and got a football scholarship to Georgia Tech, became an All-American, and then he joined the Coca-Cola Company. And he first went as a missionary, Methodist missionary to Brazil. And that's why my father was born in Brazil. And then for whatever reason, he went back to the U.S. His brother was working for the Coca-Cola Company, and he joined the Coca-Cola Company and went to Hartford, Connecticut, then to Canada. And then he went to Belgium. He spent a long time in Belgium. And as a result, when Second World War came around, they called him into the reserves as a colonel, and he helped in the supply chain for Patton, who had, his army was in Belgium, and that's where the famous Battle of the Bulge was. And he left. When he came back, he came back as the president of Coca-Cola Company for Latin America, all of Latin America except Cuba. Cuba was just a huge market, so they didn't give it to him. And they passed him up for a promotion, and so he left the company. And that was like in 1947. And he went back to Alabama and started to raise pigs. And my grandmother did not like the lifestyle. And so these three gentlemen from Medellin came to Atlanta. They were having problems with Postobon, which is a big soft drink company in Colombia. And they wanted him to help. And they talked to my uncle, and he said, look, my brother just retired. Why don't you go talk to him? And one of them was Gutierrez Gomez, who's a famous politician from Antioquia. And he joined, and he became a partner. And he also bought some plants in Mexico and some plants in Brazil. And when he died, we had Coca-Cola in Costa Rica, Guatemala, Panama, Colombia, Venezuela, part of Mexico, and part of Brazil. We were the largest Coca-Cola franchise in the world, and we sold to FEMSA. Coca-Cola FEMSA now has our franchises plus what they had and what they've built since then. And the reason I'm doing what I'm doing now is because in 1980 and 1981, both my grandfather and my father died, different times. And so my side of the family, I had progressed a lot in the company. My other cousins had not, and uncles. And I think there was jealousy and there was arrogance on my part, so we didn't negotiate properly, and I ended up leaving. So that was the first time I failed. So that product of failure, spat me out, And so I went looking for a job, and they said to me, look, there are these guys in Colombia, in Cali and Bogota, this is in Medellin, looking to bring McDonald's to Colombia. They don't know a thing about it. You know about retail. You worked with the Coca-Cola company, with the company for a long time. Maybe you could help, and they might give you 10% of the business if you run it. So I talked to them. They were from an insurance company. Anyway, long story short, I finally got to the corporation. I got the idea of coming to Colombia as a joint venture partner and starting McDonald's in Colombia. And that was in the time of raging narco traffic. They killed judges. They killed presidential candidates. It was a disaster. And they didn't feel comfortable coming to Colombia to visit because of insecurity. And they weren't also giving us the ability to remit royalties. So, a royalty-based company cannot get royalties. They just say no. So they said no. And they said, come up and talk to us. I went up and talked to them. And that night, as I was leaving to go to the airport, Planeación Nacional said, you can remit royalties. So I show up there and I say, look, we got it. It's too late. We already decided, And what would you like to do? And I said, well, no, I like the business. I like McDonald's. They said, well, look, we need somebody to run and help us start the business in Argentina, Uruguay, and Chile. Would you like to do it? And I said, well, I've never been there. And they said, well, come down and look at it. And I did. And after about a year of that, they said, look, the corporation would like to make you a partner. And that meant that I would have 51% of the business and they would have 49. And I had sold my house in Bogota. And I said, yeah, but I don't have that much money. I mean, this is a big country. And this was in 1983. So Alfonsín had just come into power. It was, it was one of the periods of Argentina's resurgence. And so I went down there, and I'm doing that, and they said, look, the chairman of the company would like to know if you'd like to be this partner. I said, yeah, but I don't have the money. Well, they're willing to give you, for every dollar you put in, the company will put in 3, but you keep 51%. I didn't study math, but that one
sounded good.
I figured out. And that was great. But there again, I was a product of another failure, which was not being able to take the company to Colombia. So I believe in failure. I think you need to fail. And if you don't fail, you're not doing enough to progress, right? But anyway, so I was partner in Argentina from 1983 till, well, recently, 2006, when the company decided to sell all of its operations in Latin America. And there was a competitive bidding process. And my group was lucky to win. And so it's been great.
Well, that's a tremendous story, Woods. And since 2006 until today, you keep on growing, you keep on developing new markets. And you mentioned failure, but you also mentioned taking risks and even going to places that you had not been before. Is there like a Wood Stanton set of principles that you might want to share with students and entrepreneurs, like those principles that guide you on a permanent basis when you do business, but with the way that you do it, because you do well by doing good? Have you thought about that, of some of those principles? Some sort of advices?
No, not really. I mean, I think hard work. I mean, you have to work. The only quality I have, quite frankly, is that I can choose good people. So over the years, I've been able to really surround myself with people who are just absolutely fantastic. And I think I picked it up from my grandfather. He always said, choose people who are smarter than you are. And that's what I've done pretty consistently. So I would say that in the various companies that we have in Latin America, Arcos Dorados is by far the largest. Everybody that works for us is just outstanding. And so I think you have to believe in people. You have to give them room to operate. You can't, micromanage them. I believe in failure, the ability to fail. And I also believe in Latin America. I think Latin America is a fantastic place for young people to go, and I would encourage any young person who wants to do something in life and really be, not just do something, it's called purpose. We've worked a lot with Harvard Business School now, doing something on the purpose. You know, it's been proven that companies that have a purpose, people who have a purpose, they sell 25% more, or they make 25% more. You know, you don't just go to work. You go there, and it's much more than a mission, vision, and values. It's you have a purpose in your life. The company has a purpose, and that's a very powerful thing. And I believe in that. That's the overarching, I think, principle.
That was in some sort of way my next question, because in the investor world, when the investors see Latin America, they regularly see lots of risks. They regularly see a lot of political instability. Sometimes they see macroeconomic shocks. And you've been in the business for 4 decades with tremendous success. You've been able to pass through hyperinflations, pass through recessions, great political instability in different countries. What's the secret behind the way you do business in Latin America to think more long-term and in some sort of way try to keep away of the shocks that for another investor will be just a mechanism to leave, but you've been willing to stay?
Yeah, well, you have to believe in the long term of Latin America, and it has not failed us. I mean, we've lived through the crises of Alfonsín leaving office. Then when Menem came in, and you had not the dollarization, but you had the what was it called? Convertibility, yeah. And then that failed. And now we've had, last 21 years of just a, slow drift downwards. This year in Argentina, we're going to be selling very well. So you've got to look at the long term. I mean, and you have to look at the census numbers. You have to see what's going on with society. And I think overall, you can do a lot more, right? You can have free trade agreements. You can do much more to bring industry back into Latin America and to create more jobs, without a doubt. But notwithstanding that, it's a stable. There is a stable environment in a way in Latin America. We all are from the Iberic Peninsula.
Mm-hmm.
We don't have religious issues. I think that if you look at recent history, the right doesn't go to that right, and the left doesn't go all that left. It comes back, and you're sort of in the middle. I mean, we always are worried if it goes too much to one side or the other. But I think there's general stability. That doesn't mean that there's no narco traffic. That doesn't mean there's no devastation of the environment. Yeah, and the terrible issue of poverty. Yeah,
but that's also a question that I had for you, because you will say that you've been able to navigate the complexities of Latin America, but I know you've put a lot of attention on how institutions work, because part of that stability is building stronger institutions. Maybe one of the most important institutions that we have built in the last 50 years in Latin America is a rebirth of democracy. Sometimes we have to struggle with demagogues who want to stay in power, of what I call the dictocracies, which are democracies that end up being in the path of becoming dictatorships, like has happened in Venezuela or in Nicaragua. What keeps you up awake at night about democracy in Latin America, Woods? You think democracy it's at risk at this moment in the region, and what do you think is going to be the role of the private sector to protect the democratic institutions?
Yeah, I think democracy is at risk, and I think it's at risk because there's a lot of disinterest. I don't know. I was telling you earlier. And I don't remember which newspaper, but it was the Saturday-Sunday edition of either Wall Street Journal or the FT, where they talk about the origins of the word idiocy, right? Idiot. And it's not somebody who's dumb or somebody who's crazy. It's a Greek word, it's a Greek word, which came from the Greeks saying that idiots were people who didn't understand how democracy works, how systems work, and how their government worked, and how that would put in peril, the very essence of Greece, which was democracy. And I think people, and I think it's not just for Latin America. I think young people today don't really understand how institutions work. And I don't think the brightest and the best either go into public service. I mean, you've talked to, I remember growing up, talking to, my mother or other people saying how, really the success was working in the private sector, in the public sector, and in the educational sector. If you did those three, you were a whole person, right? And you got benefit from one, and you gave to the other two. And I don't think people think that way today. And somehow working for society, for the individual, needs to be important. And I think, going back to what I was saying before about purpose, the purpose of a company is not just to make money. It's, I guess, number one is to take care of your shareholders, without a doubt. But you can do it by taking care of other stakeholders. And those include, obviously your suppliers, your employees, without a doubt, society in general, but also having a seat at the table when these discussions about what's going on with democracy, what is needed for the country, take place.
There's a discussion taking place in Latin America about this poll that regularly comes out called Latinobarometro, where most of the citizens today, and even in the young population, there's a lot of distrust in democracy. I debate whether that really means that people don't like democracy, because I think people do like democracy. But there's a distrust that you will point out that is related to poverty, inequality, and the need to grow faster. When you look at the numbers of Latin America in the midst of many complexities, the last 40 years have been the best 40 years ever in the history of Latin America in terms of poverty reduction, expansion of healthcare and education coverage. So there's a sentiment, but evidence tell us that we've been doing much better than previous times. But anyhow, people want things faster. And I'm also certain that there's no way you can reduce poverty without growth, without inclusive growth. And that inclusive growth means you have to create an ecosystem for small and medium-sized companies to emerge and bloom. What obstacles do you think have to be removed in order to have a more vibrant private sector development in Latin America, from your experience?
I think the red tape to start a business, right? I think it's here in the U.S., if you want to start a business, it takes a couple of hours. If you want to register a company in Brazil, until a few years ago, it took months. I think the previsibilidad, and I stayed in English. Forecasting of taxes. You take Colombia, our country, every 2 years. There's a new tax reform. And so it makes it difficult to make long-term decisions. And those are tweaks that you can do. I mean, I don't think Colombia has raised that much more taxes over these last X years by changing their tax policies every 2 years.
Well, I had to pass 3 tax reforms. So
there you go. There you go. We'll do.
I'm just kidding.
We'll do the calculation. No, but I mean, but no, most countries don't go through those. We're going through one now in Brazil, and I don't think I think since their new constitution came into play, I don't know how many years ago, but long time, there hasn't been a tax reform. Taxes are a mess the way they are. It's just very complex. And this is going to clean it up and fix it. But there's been previsibilidad all these years. And now we're going through all these conversations. So I think those are things. I think government, and that's one of the things I wanted to say before about, the private sector with government. I think it's important that government work with us in the private sector to resolve these issues and to fix them. And we as business people or private sector, we need to be we need a seat at the table, and we need to be seen and accepted as forces for good. We're not just interested in getting as much money.
Well, when I was in office, I remember we had all these discussions on how to create a better business environment and how to lower taxations for small, medium, and large-size enterprises. And at the end, it paid well by triggering more employment, more growth, and actually allowing Colombian companies to integrate with the world economy. But there's an issue that I think still is pending in Latin America, and it has to do with labor market regulation. You're the head of a group where you have almost 100,000 employees. Most of your employees are between 18 and 30 years old, which is very similar to the median age in many countries in Latin America. And many of the youngsters who enter the labor market want to have more flexibility to do other things, to have the possibility to work, but also to enjoy life in a different way than their parents or grandparents did. But it happens that the labor market seems to be too rigid. And many people believe that if you enter to maybe deregulate some of those rigidities, you're actually weakening the labor quality. What's your take on how should labor market reforms look like in order to generate more opportunities for youngsters and at the same time allow entrepreneurs to hire more people?
Yeah, I don't know the numbers now. I had them like last year, but I forgot what they are. But for instance, in Brazil, you need to work by law a certain amount of hours, right? I think could be 6 hours a day. That's the minimum. So in the U.S., if you work at McDonald's, you can work 4 hours. We have, as a policy, we've always had 4 hours as a minimum. Now, that allows you to work, and it also allows you to continue your education. And if you look at our company today, the top leadership of the company, they started with us when they were 16 or 17. They got their college education because they were able to work and study. And then we allowed them to get their MBAs or other degrees. And so they all have, continuing education. They're all smart, and it's a meritocracy. We are an example of how you can use that time and have flexible labor law to study. Now, we don't allow our kids to work 4 hours in one restaurant and then 4 hours in another restaurant, because that would be sort of a burla,
Right.
a mockery of the law. So that's the thing, I think, someplace where the government also can work with the private sector and have trust in us and help us get these things, because the meritocracy that we have, and it's not anything else but just normal meritocracy. It's just, everybody, women, men, whatever your origin, you have the same ability as anybody else, flourishes and people like it because it exists. It's not because of some law.
And something that will attach to that is the value chains. Because when you have such a massive amount of restaurants, you become a buyer of services and goods in an economy, from SMEs as well. What are the mechanisms that you think the value chains can be strengthened in Latin America? You're an outlier in a sense that you regularly pay your suppliers in due time, but that's not the case that we see in Latin America, where SMEs get paid beyond 90 days, 120 days, so they have to struggle with the lack of oxygens to keep on surviving. What would be your counsel, your advice, in order to strengthen the aggregated value chain, which is the best way to distribute the growth benefits in a society?
Yeah, well, we buy locally wherever we can. Obviously, the food chain, we try to do it local as much as we can. French fries, they come from either the north, Idaho in the U.S. and Canada, or else from Mar del Plata and Mendoza, or Tasmania. So you cannot grow the potatoes we use in Ecuador or Peru. So although they discovered the potato in Peru, we can't use Peruvian potatoes because they're small. One of those things of progress, which is an aberration, but that's the way it is. But we buy locally all the food based supply chain. But then there are other things like the packaging. Packaging is going through a whole transformation in the world now. You're getting biodegradable materials. There's a lot of technology in the whole packaging industry to make it, safe. Not just safe, but safe for the planet. It's very difficult to get economies of scale with medium and small enterprises, so they can be price competitive. So there are challenges, but I think, without a doubt, well, I'll tell you, I was in Bogota a year ago, and I was waiting for, I had a doctor's appointment, so I went to eat at a McDonald's, and they brought me a hamburger, and it had the hamburger, the meat was from the U.S., the wrapping was from the U.S., the sugar was, no, the Splenda was from the U.S., and I blew a fuse because I said, how can we be here saying that we're this, responsible company when all these products are from the U.S.? And they're there legally. I mean, they're there because of the free trade, But I think businesses, and that's where the business has to come in, we have got to look for ways of adding value to the communities we're in. And so now it's changing slowly. Now we're trying to develop beef production in Colombia, which surprisingly doesn't exist, but we have to work on it. We're trying to work on a project where we can do it for both.
On the same standards that you're...
No, exactly the same standards, yeah. We're trying to work on it. We need volume. So we're trying to do it between Colombia and now Venezuela, which is coming back. So it's not easy. It's not easy, but you have got to be conscious of what you're doing as a company. You can't just get the cheapest or lowest price, not the cheapest, but the lowest price input to your value chain. And so we're talking, for instance, in the case of paper goods, right? Our containers and our paper goods. We're talking to a company in Italy to see if they can put up a plant in some part of South America that'll be good for us, good for them. It's a good market for them, and they're not there. So those kinds of things.
So before we continue with substance, just a minor question, because you said you went to McDonald's last week. What do you order in a McDonald's when you go?
Well, there's a sandwich we have called the Magnifica, which is a quarter pounder with tomato, lettuce, and...
Good advice for us.
That's great. It's great. And so I have that with coffee and Coke Zero.
So what's you're talking about, all this, the value chains, the workforce, the spirit of meritocracy, but you're also a techie. You love technology, and you're involved in technology now, thinking on the better use of robotics to have more efficient supply of food in different markets. Before we get to that, how do you think AI is going to impact your business? How do you think AI is going to make your business better, or how it can be a threat to your business? And how are you adapting to those changes?
Well, it's interesting you asked it because you were talking before about Latin America versus the U.S. or Europe and developed areas. In the area of digital, what we call digital, we are in Latin America, McDonald's. We are as developed or better than any other area of the world in McDonald's. And that's a game changer. You're no longer the taker or receptor only of technology. You're also producing it yourself. And you see companies like Mercado Libre and Globant and in the Southern Cone. I think there's some other ones in Colombia they're fantastic, and they're just as good or better than European or American counterparts. So that's a big change. And I think in the case of AI, how AI can help, one of the obvious ones is in making you, treating you as an individual, not just a general part of that male subset, that eats, that quarter pounder. And that AI, they'll see you come in with facial recognition, which we cannot use because of privacy laws.
Mm-hmm.
But we also can find out where you've come from, right? And when you were there last time and you become a member, we know sort of what you ordered, what time you came in, how often you come, and we can tailor our offering to you when you come in. And the other area we're doing AI is in a supply chain. So we have a lot of money in inventory all through the system. And if we can use AI to predict sales trends, weather trends, what people are buying because of the time of year or the day part, we can keep our inventory levels lower without loss of sales. Yeah, and so that's huge. And then also, we're using AI in a big way for figuring out where we put up the next restaurant. We look at traffic patterns. We look at what other other negocios, other businesses are going close by. So it's going to become more and more important as we go forward.
So if we connect technology with another passion that you have, that is sustainability, how are you using that combination of what I call sustainability? The technology is applied to the sustainability processes. How are you improving waste management? How are you improving reducing the consumption of energy, and even making the supply chain more carbon neutral over time? What do you have in your mind at this in this time?
What we're starting to pick up in Uruguay, Mexico, I think Colombia, now Argentina. We're picking up our used oil, so that there's a drum, all the old oil is put in there. We take out, we filter it, and then that oil goes to Spain. And there it's filtered and made into, converted into, or used for making biofuel. Now, why does it have to go to Spain? Is the question. So that's what we're looking at now. Why don't we bring that into our continent and do it in our own continent? So we're looking at that. We're looking at, with all of our cattle, we're trying to make sure they are carbon neutral. We're working with Embrapa, Empresa Brasileira de Pesquisa, to make sure, to see if we can make the carbon footprint of cattle lower. We have a company called AgroTools that monitors all the areas in the Amazon and in the Floresta, the smallholder cattle producer. And I don't know if you know, but the way a cow goes from calf to slaughterhouse is they travel. They start in one place and they go to another, so it's difficult to track it. And it's at the very base, it's all informal. There's no paperwork, and so we use drones to check on that, and that's helped. We've come down from cattle that was coming out of these areas that were jungle or floresta. I think we were 10% in the bad. Now it's like 0.02. So we've gotten a lot better. That's great. And we don't buy from people who do violate those things. So that's what we're doing. With the we came out with a sustainability linked bond. I think we were the first company in Latin America to come out with a sustainability linked bond 2 years ago. We publish a sustainability report that's one of the only ones in the food business that's audited by external auditors. So those things lend credibility to us and we have to do it. We don't do it. We do it because we want to do it, but we do it because it's also good business.
And let me ask you something about that. The discussion about synthetic protein that is now a massive discussion in the food business. What do you think about that? Do you think that at some point we're going to do more research in Latin America, maybe be able at some point to have synthetic protein in the products that we might buy in McDonald's 1 or 2 years from now?
Yeah, I don't know. That's something that is something McDonald's Corporation has to decide. But what has not worked is plant-based. I think synthetic. It depends on how people perceive it, and I think also it depends on the bite, because they can make it, but I think they have still a lot of work to do on the bite of that protein, be it meat, chicken, or vegetables, because you can make anything.
Woods, another passion that you have, philanthropy, because we know about Arcos Dorados, we know how big Arcos Dorados is, but I've seen you in the last decade where we have interacted, how you have that passion for Arcos Dorados Foundation and the work that you do in different countries. How are you focusing right now your philanthropic efforts in Latin America? What are the things that you really want to make an impact? Have you focused more? Have you diversified more the efforts of the philanthropic work that you do? And which countries are now your most, not your favorite, because I know you work on all the region, but which countries are you putting the higher effort on philanthropic work with the Arcos Dorados Foundation?
Well, we have Ronald McDonald houses that are places where families with their young children can stay when they go through oncological issues or whatever, child related, and those we have them in I think 10 countries or more in Latin America. We build new houses every year. We also work with the Instituto Ailton Senna in Brazil, which is for education. But I think where I'm more involved in, where I like to spend my time, I think education and education around how business and society and government can be more able partners is what I'm interested in, because I think we need to be at the table as business, as a private sector, and I think we're very much more results oriented than maybe government is. I think we're pretty well organized, not to denigrate the governments, but I think we can add a lot of value, and I think we bridge ideological differences. We're just interested in getting to a point. I remember going to a university here in the U.S. And discussing a country's issues using the case study method, and you had leftist politicians and you had rightist business people, and they were discussing cases in India and in Africa, and they had to work together to come, and it was great. And I think teaching that and being a part of that, and what is the role of business in society?
And you talk about education in the philanthropic work. You talk about sustainability. You also talk about how to improve the efficiency of the food supply. And I think the work that you're doing now in technology for the food supply integrates all those concepts. Why don't you tell us a little bit more about what's the next stage of that work that you're doing right now? I've seen some of the images, and they're absolutely fascinating. I invite you to look in online, because what Woods is doing right now is really going to change the efficiency of the whole supermarket food supply. Why don't you tell us about what's your goal there?
Well, that's a company that was set up by an Argentine and a Venezuelan. They were both at HBS, Harvard Business School. And the idea is to robotize the supermarkets. So with delivery, it's just a lot of money to have somebody go down the aisles. I don't know if anybody uses Instacart but those are human beings walking down the aisle and picking up stuff and putting it in a car and driving to your house. Well, if a robot can do that, they can do it much more efficiently. And if you can make it not just one, but a whole bunch of these, then the last mile is a lot closer, and you spend a lot less money on transport and make it more efficient. So we're working on that, and that's a project that is fascinating. It's a complicated one, but ahí vamos, más o menos.
So before I open the questions from the audience, some personal questions like, what do you do for fun? I mean, you work a lot. You travel all over the country. When you want to disconnect yourself from the regular business management and philanthropic work, what do you do? What makes you happy?
No, well, I like art. I collect art. I collect watches. And I just spent a month in southern Italy. I'm not working that hard.
Well, that's good. And then let me ask you another question, Woods. What would you advise? I mean, if you had to mentor one of the guys who just entered Arcos Dorados, and you were to give him or her the advice of how to prosper in life, what advice would you give?
You know, I think, first of all, I'd say that you've come to the right place to work.
Good.
And
have a Magnifica every now and
yeah, there. Yeah. And just try to learn as much as you can every day. You learn from your customers, you learn from your fellow workers, and have fun. You know, it's a question of having fun. If you enjoy what you're doing, I've never worked, honestly. I mean, I have fun.
Good. So I'm going to open the questions from the audience, and just two considerations. Please don't editorialize your question. Try to be as concrete as possible so we can have more people asking questions. I have one over here.
Hi, thank you for this forum. My name is Contessa Bourbon. I'd like to ask, I'm a journalist. I'd like to ask the two of you, there's rampant drug plantation in Latin America and Colombia.
Rampant what?
Rampant drug plantation. What should businesses do or companies do to have a seat on the table and help in alternative plantation, like planting coffee or fruits instead of planting poppies and marijuana or other drugs that should eventually reduce drug trafficking in Latin America? What's your views?
Well, you want me to go first, Luis?
Yeah,
So on that, you know, my opinion is the following. What makes the drug business such a profitable business is all the chain of increasing value, of illegal increasing value. And in my opinion, there's a lack of coherency in the developed world, because basically since the year 2020, and we're in 2023, the consumption of cocaine has skyrocketed to the highest peak ever. Even with the new drugs that we're seeing today, like fentanyl, we're still seeing skyrocketing demand. From the supply side, countries are doing all they literally can. We do substitution, we do eradication, we do alternative development, we pay growers of coca to move to other crops. We try to do as much as we can. But there's nothing going on really today in order to fight the demand, even from a public health perspective. And I think that's missing. Now, what you can do also in our countries is to incentivize the legal businesses. But those legal businesses in the areas where coca grows are not so, there's not a huge variety. So I'll give you two examples. Cocoa, that we in Colombia massively started producing in the region close to Venezuela, in El Catatumbo, or close to Tumaco. We're still struggling to have the approval for Colombian cocoa to enter massively the US market or the European market. So if you can give more access to those products, you would definitely allow growers to have other formal profitable business. But I still believe the rule of law and the enforcement on the illegal economy needs to happen. And this is not a war, to call it in a sense, because I don't like the term war on drugs. You still need to be very tough on law and order to tackle all the supply of chemicals that are verted in the jungles. You have to let the world know that cocaine is the most environmentally damaging drug in the planet. People don't know that to produce a kilo of coca, you use gallons of gasoline, like if you were pumping an SUV every 4 hours, or that you're using the amount of cement that you might use just to build a small wall, and then you have all those chemicals that are verted in the jungles. I think if the world gets to know that cocaine is also the great ecocide of all drugs, that will help to debrand the consumption of cocaine in a global scale. But those things take more time. So I think that will be my response. And I also believe that we have to use all the tools. Even if some of the tools might sound controversial, I think today with their better technology, where there's industrial production, where people are faced to threat from the cartels, to use precision spray. But that's, I know, it's a bigger debate. But anyhow, I think those items will be interesting to have. I don't know if you want to add something on that, Woods, because you're the guest. I mean, I'm not supposed to
No.
respond to questions here.
I agree with everything you said. No, I have no idea. I mean, no idea. And I know it's a problem, and I think, synthetic drugs are even getting to be a bigger problem because they're easier to hide and transport and all that. But I think
So since we're running out of time, we have only chance for two more questions. Ambassador Negroponte, you wanted to ask a question.
Well, I do have one question. Thank you very much, Mr. President. 30, 40 years ago, we all talked about 30 or 40 years ago, we all talked about the population explosion and so on and that's sort of become either a taboo. It's become a non-subject. We don't, and yet I served in quite a few areas, two countries in Latin America. I look at the population of Honduras has tripled or quadrupled since I served there 4 decades ago. I assume that that's in part a good thing for Arcos Dorados. But on the other hand, I think it helps create some of the tremendous pressures that exist in these societies. I just was wondering if you had some thoughts on that whole subject, since you follow demographics for reasons of your own.
Yeah, if you take the most famous slum in Buenos Aires, right? It's called Villa 31. Now it's called Barrio 31. And there was a huge job by Luis Alberto Moreno and some other people, Horacio Rodríguez Larreta, and the mayor of Buenos Aires, to bring it into the city, to make it part of it, to make it a neighborhood, not have a slum status. What's incredible is who lives in there is third generation of people that have never worked, and they've never worked because the government had, help schemes where they would give something for every child. And you didn't have to learn anything. You didn't have to do anything. You didn't have to study. You didn't have to get another trade. I mean, and I think those kinds of policies are, for instance, are crazy. And by the way, if you see in Cartagena, where I go often, or Buenos Aires, a girl with, who's maybe 30, 31, with a child in her arms, normally she's a grandmother, and that is a problem. It's I don't know how to tackle it. I think it's education, and I think it's jobs. In this very basic form. But I simply have no idea how you tackle that.
We have one last question. We have a Georgetown MPM student, Daniel. You wanted to ask a question.
Yes, sir.
There's your mic.
Thank you very much. Mr. Woods, you've spoken about the commitment to jobs, but I've also spoken about the importance of technology in advancing toward a more profitable and rightfully. So how do you balance the impacts that technology may have on the jobs, having that's such a big, important aspect of what you do for the countries where you're at. Thank you.
Yeah, it's a good question. For instance, we have what we're, I think 40 to 50% of our sales now, we call digital sales. You do it by phone, and you order, so it's taken to you. It's taken by a third party like GoDaddy here in the States, or so that's one. The other one is where you order and pick up digitally. The other one is where you go through the drive-through and it's a digital thing. And now we have kiosks in our restaurants where instead of going to the front counter, you go to these kiosks. So the question there always comes up, well, you've supplanted these employees for kiosks. No, we haven't, because we have a person right next to each kiosk helping you go through it quickly in suggestive selling. So we have the same number of employees that we've always had. It's just much more efficient, and we have a higher throughput of people coming through. I mean, our sales have gone up considerably since 2019. During 2020 they went down obviously because of the pandemic, and that's all being fueled by these efficiencies of technology. But we cannot get away from technology. It's just and whoever wins the technology race wins the marketing, the market share race. But you can do it without losing jobs.
Woods, my last question, and I know you don't like to get into politics, and I don't mean to make you stand into politics, or get into politics. But there's an election coming in Argentina. I'm not going to ask you who you're going to vote for, so don't worry. But I'm going to ask you one thing. What worries you about the next election, and what worries you about the aftermath of the next election?
Yeah, well, I just hope that I'm from Medellin. And when I was a young guy, I was very embarrassed to tell people I was from Medellin because you had Pablo Escobar and you had the, Medellin cartel.
Now everybody wants to go to Medellin.
But look what's happened. Look what's happened to Medellin. Medellin is a technological capital of Latin America. It's a music capital. It's a great place. And it was done not in 4 years, not in 8 years, but a succession of governments that built upon what their predecessor had done. And I just hope that in Argentina, there are going to be some very tough measures to be taken. We have a negative balance of, in our coffers. We have zero reserves. You have got to start having zero deficit, and that means no more
Unsustainable subsidies
to anybody. And that's going to be bad for anybody who takes over, right? And I just hope everybody understands that we have to all gather around and we all have to work together. And it's not going to be 4 years. It's not going to be 8 years. It's probably going to be, in the case of Medellin, 16, 20 years.
But if you follow the Medellin example, private sector has been crucial in trying to create that consensus. Do you think the private sector in Argentina is ready for that call?
Yeah, but they need to be called. I don't think anybody has really called them except to say, well, we'll give you a tax holiday or we'll give you a tax break if you do this. No, it's more of come and let's talk about how we go about fixing this. Empresas Públicas de Medellín, EPM, fabulous example of public-private working together, an example for the world.
Right.
Yeah.
Woods, we ran out of time, so I have to thank you, and I invite all the audience to give a big round of applause to our guest today. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Impresionante.